The crystal water glass shattered against the wall, just inches from my head. My father Robert stood there, his face purple with rage, his hands still outstretched. "You ungrateful girl," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the opulent dining room of the Gilded Spoon. "How dare you embarrass us like this?" But the real betrayal wasn't the glass. It was my mother's silence. She just sat there, adjusting the silk napkin in her lap, her eyes cold as ice. She had just announced to our entire extended family that my college fund, every dollar I had worked for, every dollar they had promised, was being given to my brother Ethan for his brilliant new app. My dream of culinary school? A silly, dirty-handed hobby. Have you ever had a moment where the people who are supposed to build you up are the ones holding the wrecking ball? That night, they didn't just take my money, they tried to take my future. They didn't know I was about to build an empire with the rubble they left behind. The evening had started with the familiar, suffocating weight of my family's expectations. It was my 21st birthday, and the venue was the Gilded Spoon, a restaurant that was less about food and more about performance. It was my parents' stage, a place with heavy silverware, starched white tablecloths, and waiters who moved with the silent, practiced grace of ghosts. My father, Robert, thrived here. He loved being greeted by name, loved the way the general manager, David, would personally escort us to our table in the center of the room. It was a testament to his status, his success, and he wore it like a tailored suit. My mother, Margaret, was the director of this play. She orchestrated everything, from the guest list to the seating chart, ensuring everyone was positioned to best appreciate the Vance family's perfect life. Tonight, the audience included a full cast of aunts, uncles, and cousins, all smiling a little too brightly. And then there was my brother, Ethan, seated to my father's right, glowing with a smug sense of importance. He was the star of the show. I was just a supporting character, and I was about to go off script. In my purse, tucked away in an envelope, was my acceptance letter to one of the best culinary institutes in the country. A thrill, both nervous and excited, ran through me every time I thought about it. For years, I had worked part-time jobs, saving every penny. My parents had promised to match my savings for a proper education, and while culinary school wasn't their idea of proper, I hoped the prestige of the institution might sway them. A foolish hope, I know, but at 21 you still believe you can earn the approval of the people you love. The meal was a blur of polite conversation. My uncle asked Ethan about the stock market. My aunt complimented my mother's necklace. I mostly stayed quiet, pushing a piece of sea bass around my plate, the knot in my stomach tightening with every passing minute. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, sat across from me. She gave me a small, nervous smile whenever our eyes met, but quickly looked away, as if eye contact was an act of defiance she couldn't afford. She was a casualty of a bad divorce, and my parents' financial support was her lifeline. Her silence was bought and paid for. Finally, the dessert plates were cleared. This was it. My mother tapped her champagne flute with a manicured nail, the delicate ping cutting through the low hum of conversation. "If I could have everyone's attention," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "Robert and I have a very special announcement to make." She beamed at Ethan, who straightened his tie and puffed out his chest. I felt a cold dread begin to seep into my bones. This wasn't a birthday toast for me. "As you all know," my mother continued, "our Ethan is a true visionary. He has the kind of brilliant mind that is going to change the world." She paused for effect, letting the words hang in the air. "He's developed a new social media app that investors are already calling the next big thing. It's an incredible opportunity." My father nodded, his expression a perfect blend of pride and business acumen. "An opportunity like this requires capital," he said, his voice booming slightly. "You can't build an empire on ideas alone. It requires decisive action. It requires investment." I watched them, my heart sinking. I knew what was coming. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. "That's why," my mother said, her smile never faltering, "we've decided to fully support our son's dream. We have liquidated Clara's college fund and invested the entire amount as seed money for Ethan's company." The words hit me like a physical blow. The entire fund. My money. The money they promised. The room erupted in applause. My uncles clapped my father on the back. My aunts cooed over Ethan's genius. He accepted their praise with a magnanimous nod, as if he were a king accepting tribute from his subjects. He shot a quick, triumphant smirk in my direction. My vision tunneled. The faces around me blurred. All I could hear was a high-pitched ringing in my ears. I felt every single eye in that room on me, expecting me to smile, to applaud my own erasure. I looked at Aunt Carol. She was clapping, but her eyes were filled with a pained, watery pity. She wouldn't meet my gaze. What? The word escaped my lips, barely a whisper. My father's smile tightened. What's that, Clara? My voice found a little more strength. My college fund. I got into the institute. My mother let out a short, dismissive laugh. Oh, darling, don't be so dramatic. We can't have you wasting that kind of money on a silly, dirty-handed hobby, working in a hot kitchen. It's beneath you. It's beneath this family. It's my dream, I said, my voice trembling now. I could feel the hot sting of tears behind my eyes, and I hated myself for it. It's my money. I worked for it. You were selfish. My father's voice was low and menacing. Thinking only of yourself. Ethan is building something for the family's future, our legacy, and you're crying about wanting to be a line cook? A nobody? The humiliation was a physical thing, a heavy cloak that settled over my shoulders, suffocating me. The pity in the room had curdled into scorn. I was the ungrateful child, the fool who didn't understand the big picture. You promised me, I said, my voice cracking. You broke your promise. That's when my father snapped. The mask of the benevolent patriarch fell away, revealing the tyrant underneath. Ungrateful girl, he roared, shoving his chair back. He snatched the crystal water glass from the table and hurled it. It exploded against the flocked wallpaper behind me, showering my hair with tiny shards of glass and water. The room went dead silent. And that's when I saw the real betrayal. It wasn't the theft of my future. It wasn't the public shaming or the shattered glass. It was my mother. She didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She just sat there, her expression one of cold annoyance, and calmly adjusted the silk napkin in her lap. My pain was an inconvenience, a messy spill on her perfect evening. In that moment, I understood. They weren't just taking my money. They were trying to break me. You are officially cut off, my father spat, his face a grotesque mask of fury. You can come back when you've learned some gratitude and respect. He gestured to the door with a flick of his wrist. Now get out. You've ruined this evening. I stood up, my legs shaking. I looked around the table, at the shocked and fearful faces of my family. I looked at Ethan, who couldn't quite hide his smug satisfaction. I looked at my mother, whose face was a blank wall of disapproval. Then my eyes found David, the manager, who was standing near a service station, pretending to be busy, but watching everything. For a fraction of a second, his professional mask slipped, and I saw a look of profound human sympathy. It was the only kindness in the entire room. I turned and walked away, my back straight, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me run. I could feel their eyes on my back. As I pushed through the heavy doors and stepped out into the cool night air, I heard the sound of laughter from inside. They were already moving on, resetting the stage, erasing the unpleasant scene. I stood on the curb, the sounds of the city, a dull roar in my ears, and I made a promise to myself. They thought they had left me with nothing. They were wrong. They had left me with a burning, all-consuming fire, and I was going to use it to burn their world to the ground. The night of my birthday dinner was the beginning of a freefall. The fallout was as swift and brutal as my father's anger. When I tried to go home the next morning, my key wouldn't turn in the lock. They had changed them. My car, a modest sedan that was my pride and joy, was gone from its spot in the driveway. A quick, panicked call confirmed it had been repossessed. It was, of course, in my father's name. Just like that, I was homeless, carless, and had exactly $187 in my checking account. The life I knew had been surgically removed, and I was left bleeding on the pavement. I called my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, my last hope for a soft place to land. She picked up on the fifth ring. "Clara," she whispered, her voice tight with anxiety. I could hear the clinking of dishes in the background. She was probably at my parents' house, helping my mother clean up from the party. "Aunt Carol," I said, my voice breaking, "they locked me out, I have nowhere to go." There was a long pause, filled with her shaky breathing. Oh, Clara, I'm so sorry. What your father did, it was terrible. Her sympathy felt hollow, a flimsy bandage on a gaping wound. Can I stay with you? Just for a few days? Until I figure things out? Another pause, longer this time. I can't, sweetie, she finally said, her voice dropping even lower. You know my situation. Robert and your mother, they help me so much. If I go against them, I'll lose everything. I understood. She was a hostage, and her captors were my parents. I understand, I said, the words tasting like ash. I hung up the phone. The last door had closed. For the first week, I was a ghost. I slept on the lumpy couch of a college friend, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. I spent my days at the public library, using their computers to apply for any job I could find. Barista, cashier, stalker. My dreams of culinary school felt like a cruel joke. The weight of my situation was a physical thing. It was a constant pressure in my chest, a knot of anxiety that made it hard to breathe, hard to eat. My friend was kind, but I could feel her patience wearing thin. I was an unwelcome disruption in her life, a problem she hadn't asked for. I needed to find my own place, no matter how small. I found a room for rent in a rundown house on the other side of town. The landlord wanted first and last month's rent up front, $400. I had less than half that. There was only one thing left to do. My grandmother, my father's mother, had given me a small gold locket before she passed away. It was simple, with a tiny etched bird on the front. It was the only sentimental thing I had left, a tangible link to a part of my family that had once felt like love. I took it to a pawn shop, the kind with bars on the windows and a man behind the counter whose eyes were as dead as his merchandise. He weighed it in his hand, squinted at it through a loupe, and offered me $250. I took it without haggling, my hand trembling as I signed the slip. The locket was gone. My last piece of my old life was gone. But I had the rent money. The room was even worse than it looked in the online ad. It was tiny, with a stained mattress on the floor, and a single window that looked out onto a brick wall. I saw a cockroach scurry across the floor on the first night, and spent the rest of the night sitting up, my back against the wall, listening to the sounds of the city and the skittering in the dark. I finally landed 2 jobs. The first was a 6 a.m. shift at a generic coffee chain, a soulless place of beeping machines and forced smiles. The second was an evening shift, from 5 p.m. to midnight, as a dishwasher at a small, struggling diner called Chen's Place. The diner was old and worn, the vinyl on the booths cracked and faded. The air was thick with the smell of old grease, bleach, and something else, something warm and savory that hinted at real food being cooked somewhere in the back. The work was brutal. I spent hours standing over a steaming industrial sink, my hands plunged into greasy water, scrubbing at the stubborn remains of other people's meals. The steam and the heat made my face flush, and the constant noise of clattering plates was deafening. My back ached, my feet throbbed, and my hands were perpetually raw and red. This was the life my mother had sneered at. The dirty-handed hobby. I would come home to my little room reeking of bleach and fried onions, too exhausted to even cry. I felt like a complete and utter failure, a ghost haunting the edges of a life I was supposed to have. The owner of the diner, Mr. Chen, was a stern, elderly man with deep lines etched into his face. He moved with a quiet, deliberate economy of motion, his presence filling the small space. He barely spoke to me in the first few weeks. He'd just watch me from the corner of his eye as I worked, his expression unreadable. I kept my head down. I scrubbed every pot until it shone. I mopped the floors until the black and white tiles were clean. I never complained. I just worked. I was paying my dues. Though I wasn't sure to whom. I was at rock bottom, living a life I didn't recognize, a person I no longer knew. But in the rhythmic scrape of the sponge against the pan, in the exhaustion that finally brought sleep, there was a strange kind of peace. I had nothing left to lose, and when you have nothing left to lose, you are finally free. For weeks, my life was a monotonous cycle of steam, grease, and exhaustion. I'd wake up in the dark, my body aching, and trudge to the coffee shop to froth milk and call out names that weren't mine. Then I'd have a few hours to catch a broken sleep before heading to Chen's Place, where I'd spend the night wrestling with mountains of dirty dishes. The diner was my purgatory. But one night something shifted. It was late, well past midnight, and the last customer had gone. The other cook had left, and Mr. Chen was in his small office in the back, hunched over his ledgers. The kitchen was finally quiet, the only sound the hum of the old refrigerator. I had just finished scrubbing the last of the pots, my arms feeling like lead, but instead of leaving, I found myself drawn to the prep station. I saw some leftover flour, a bit of yeast and some salt. On impulse, I started mixing them together in a clean metal bowl. My hands, though red and raw from the dishwater, moved with a forgotten muscle memory. I kneaded the dough, feeling the familiar, comforting resistance of it coming to life beneath my palms. For the first time in months, I wasn't just a machine performing a task. I was creating something. I was trying to bake a simple loaf of bread, a small act of rebellion to remind myself of the person I used to be, the person who dreamed of creating beautiful food. I was so lost in the process that I didn't hear him approach. "What are you doing?" Mr. Chen's voice, sharp and sudden, made me jump. I turned around, my hands white with flour, my heart pounding. I expected him to be angry, to yell at me for wasting ingredients. "I'm sorry, Mr. Chen," I stammered. I'll clean it up." He didn't say anything. He just looked at the small, misshapen loaf I had formed. He walked over, picked it up, and examined it with a critical eye. Then he did something I never expected. He broke off a piece, put it in his mouth, and chewed slowly, his expression completely unreadable. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Finally, he just grunted, turned, and walked back to his office without another word. I went home that night, convinced I was going to be fired. The next day, I walked into the diner with a knot of dread in my stomach. But Mr. Chen didn't fire me. He handed me a clean white apron. "You're off dishes," he said, his voice flat. "You're on prep. Don't be slow." And just like that, I was promoted. My new job was even harder. Mr. Chen's teaching style was not one of gentle encouragement. It was a baptism by fire. He was exacting, demanding, and brutally honest. "Too much salt," he'd say, tasting a sauce I'd spent an hour on. "Do it again." "Your knife skills are a disgrace," he'd grunt, watching me clumsily chop onions. Faster, more precise. He started showing me the how of running a kitchen, not the glamorous parts, but the brutal essential mechanics of survival. He taught me how to break down a whole chicken with zero waste, using the bones for stock, the scraps for staff meal, ensuring every part of the $20 bird was monetized. He would wake me before dawn on Saturdays to go to the wholesale produce market, teaching me how to haggle, how to spot the freshest vegetables, how to build relationships with the vendors. He showed me his inventory system, a simple but meticulous spreadsheet he had designed himself. Every carrot, every onion, every ounce of flour was tracked. "This is not a game," he told me one afternoon, as we were counting bags of rice. "This is war. Your enemy is waste. Your enemy is complacency." One evening, as we were closing up, I asked him why he was helping me. He was quiet for a long time, wiping down the stainless steel counter with a practiced, steady motion. "I used to have a restaurant," he said finally, his voice soft and heavy with memory. "A beautiful place. Downtown. White tablecloths, just like the one your family goes to." He paused, his eyes distant. "It was my dream, but I was a chef, not a businessman. I had a partner, a flashy man with a big smile. He handled the books. He told me profits were soaring, even as he was bleeding the business dry, taking lavish expenses, cooking the numbers. By the time I found out, it was too late. I lost everything." He looked at me then, his gaze sharp and intense. "Passion is not enough, Clara," he said, and it was the first time he had used my name. "Passion without control is a fire that burns itself out. You must be smarter than your enemies. You must control the money." In that moment, I saw past the gruff, stern exterior. I saw a wounded man, a man whose dream had been stolen. He saw my resilience, my quiet determination, and he saw a chance to pass on the brutal lessons he had learned. He saw a chance to arm another dreamer for the battle he had lost. The next day, he pushed a crumpled piece of paper across the counter towards me. On it were the names of 2 online courses from the local community college, Small Business Management and Introduction to Accounting. "You will enroll," he said. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. You will study on your breaks, and after your shift, you will show me your grades. The grind became immense. My days were a blur of chopping vegetables, scrubbing floors, reading textbooks on my phone during my 30-minute break, and collapsing into bed with accounting principles swimming in my head. But for the first time since my world had shattered, I felt a flicker of hope. I had a purpose. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was learning. I was preparing. I was building an arsenal, piece by painstaking piece, and my drill sergeant was a sad, wise old man who smelled of ginger and regret. The next 2 years of my life vanished into a relentless routine. Work, study, sleep, repeat. The world outside my tiny room and the diner kitchen ceased to exist. I didn't date. I didn't see friends. My phone never rang with a call from my family, and I never once felt the urge to call them. I was a ghost to them, a forgotten daughter, and that anonymity became my shield. It allowed me to work in secret, to build without being seen. Every dollar I earned, minus my meager rent and the cost of my online textbooks, went into a savings account. I lived on staff meals from the diner, usually a simple but hearty noodle soup or a stir-fry Mr. Chen would make from the day's leftovers. I mended my own clothes. I cut my own hair. I became a master of frugality, a skill born of desperation that was now hardening into a discipline. My secret project, my singular obsession, was the business plan. It started as a few scribbled notes on a napkin during a late-night shift and slowly grew into a thick binder that I kept hidden under the loose floorboard in my room. It was my Bible, my roadmap out of the darkness. Guided by the principles I was learning in my online courses and the ruthless mentorship of Mr. Chen, I drafted the most comprehensive plan imaginable. This wasn't a plan for a greasy spoon diner. This was a plan for a modern bistro, the kind of place I had dreamed of in my culinary school applications. Elegant but not stuffy, with innovative food that was accessible and exciting. I called it the Spoon. The name was a small, private joke, a nod to the gilded spoon where my old life had ended, and to the greasy spoons where my new one had begun. The business plan was a work of art, forged in exhaustion and determination. It contained a 5-year financial projection, with detailed spreadsheets covering everything from payroll taxes to the cost of linen services. It had a marketing strategy targeting young professionals and foodies, leveraging social media and local food bloggers. The heart of the plan was the menu. I spent months developing it, costing out every single dish down to the last gram of salt. I knew exactly how much profit I would make on a plate of seared scallops versus a bowl of mushroom risotto. I created a logistics plan for sourcing high-quality ingredients at competitive prices, using the connections I had made with Mr. Chen at the wholesale markets. Every evening, after my shift, I would present a new section of the plan to Mr. Chen. He would sit at his usual table, sipping his tea, and he would be a ruthless editor. He would circle my projections in red ink. "This number is a fantasy," he would say, pointing to my estimated first-quarter profits. "Where is your contingency for a broken freezer? For a slow Tuesday? Plan for the worst, hope for the best." He questioned every assumption I made. Why this supplier? Is their delivery schedule reliable? What if their truck breaks down? Do you have a backup? He forced me to defend every choice, to ground every dream in cold, hard reality. "A dream is a cloud, Clara," he told me one night, his voice gruff but not unkind. "It's beautiful, and it floats in the sky, but you can't stand on it. A business plan is a ladder. Each rung is a fact, a number, a strategy. You build the ladder, and you can climb out of any hole. So I built my ladder, rung by painful, meticulous rung. I learned about commercial leases, health code regulations, and liquor licenses. I researched point-of-sale systems and employee management software. The girl who had been called a failure and a nobody was quietly becoming an expert. I was a secret, gestating in the shadows, fueled by ramen noodles and revenge. My family thought I was scrubbing pots in some forgotten corner of the city. They had no idea I was building an empire on a spreadsheet. They had no idea that the ladder I was building was designed to reach a height they couldn't even imagine. One sweltering afternoon in July, a man named Sal walked into the diner. He was a supplier, a big one, who usually dealt with the high-end restaurants downtown. He was a friend of Mr. Chen's, and he had a proposition. He sat at the counter, sweating in his cheap suit, and laid out the deal. He had a massive overstock of prime-grade beef and some high-end produce, scallops, asparagus, wild mushrooms. The problem was, it was all nearing its expiration date. Not spoiled, not unsafe, but close enough that the fancy restaurants with their exacting standards wouldn't touch it. "I gotta move it, and I gotta move it now," Sal said, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "I can give it to you for 20 cents on the dollar. It's a steal. You could turn a massive profit." My mind immediately started racing. I did the math in my head. A deal like this would be a monumental boost to my savings. It would cut months, maybe even a full year off my timeline. I could see the rungs of my ladder suddenly getting closer together. I could feel the dream getting within reach. The temptation was immense. It felt like a gift from the universe, a reward for all my hard work. I imagined my bank account, flush with the extra cash. I could finally get a better apartment, maybe even start looking at commercial spaces. I was practically vibrating with excitement. I told Sal I would think about it and get back to him by the end of the day. As soon as he left, I pulled out my business plan and went to Mr. Chen. I laid it all out for him, my voice quick and eager, showing him the numbers, the potential profit margin. I expected him to be impressed, to praise my savvy, opportunistic thinking. After all, he was the one who taught me to be ruthless, to fight for every advantage. But he didn't look impressed. He listened patiently, his hands folded on the table, and when I was finished, a look of profound disappointment settled over his features. It was a look that hit me harder than any of his harsh criticisms ever had. He was quiet for a long moment, just looking at me. "Let me tell you a story, Clara," he said, his voice low and solemn, "about my old restaurant. Before my partner started stealing the big money, he started with the small things. He was a man who loved a good deal, just like this one." He stared out the window, his eyes seeing a past I could only imagine. "He started by buying cheaper cuts of meat. The customers won't notice," he'd say. "We'll just cook it a little longer." Then it was the wine. He'd swap out the premium label for a cheaper one in the same bottle. Then the produce. A little less fresh, a little older. "It all goes into the sauce anyway," he'd argue. Mr. Chen looked back at me, his gaze piercing. Each compromise was small, almost invisible on its own, but they added up. The quality slipped, slowly at first, then all at once. The customers, they did notice. They always notice. They stopped coming. Our reputation, which had taken me years to build, was destroyed in months. "That deal," he said, tapping my spreadsheet with his finger, "that was the beginning of the end for me. It was the first time I chose money over my promise to the people who walked through my door." He leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper, but carrying the weight of years of regret. "The moment you compromise your integrity for money, you have already failed. Your name, your promise to the customer, is your most valuable asset. It's the only thing you truly own. Don't sell it for 20 cents on the dollar." His words landed like stones in my stomach. I looked down at my neat columns of numbers, at the tempting profit projection, and I felt a wave of shame wash over me. He was right. I had been so focused on the finish line, on getting my revenge, that I was willing to take a shortcut that would have betrayed everything I was supposedly building. The whole point was to build something better, something real, something with integrity. It was a test, and I had almost failed it. The choice was clear, but it was still hard. It meant more months of scrimping, more nights in my roach-infested room, more time spent in the shadows. But the decision solidified something inside me. I walked to the phone and called Sal. "Thank you for the offer," I said, my voice steady, "but I'm going to have to pass." I hung up the phone and looked at Mr. Chen. A small, rare smile touched the corners of his lips. He simply nodded. It was a setback, financially, but it was a profound moral victory. It was the moment I stopped being fueled solely by revenge and started being guided by principle. I wasn't just building a business anymore. I was building a reputation, and I would build it the right way, without a single crack in the foundation. I had been living in the shadows for so long, I started to believe I was truly invisible. I was wrong. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was my Aunt Carol. Her voice was a nervous flutter, so quiet I could barely hear her over the sizzle of the grill at the diner. "Clara, it's me, Aunt Carol," I said, surprised. We hadn't spoken in nearly 2 years. Is everything okay? Yes. Yes, I'm fine, she rushed to say. I was just talking to your mother. She was asking about you. I might have let it slip where you were working. A cold dread trickled down my spine. What did you tell her? Just the name of the diner, she said, her voice full of apology. I'm so sorry, Clara. She just cornered me, and I didn't need her to finish the sentence. I knew exactly how my mother operated. Her questions like expertly placed scalpels, dissecting your defenses until you gave her what she wanted. It's okay, Aunt Carol, I said, even though it wasn't. I knew this wasn't an olive branch. It was a recon mission. The attack came that Friday night. It was our busiest time, the small diner packed with regulars. I was running back and forth from the kitchen, helping the waitress, when the bell over the door jingled. I looked up and froze. It was my brother, Ethan. And he wasn't alone. He was with 3 of his friends, all of them dressed in expensive, trendy clothes that looked completely out of place in our humble diner. They reeked of cologne and entitlement. Ethan's eyes scanned the room with a look of theatrical disgust, a smirk already playing on his lips. He saw me, and his smirk widened into a triumphant grin. He sauntered over to the counter and leaned against it, looking me up and down, taking in my simple uniform black pants, a white shirt, and a stained apron. Well, 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 he said, his voice loud enough for the whole diner to hear. Look what we have here. Little sister Clara, living her dream. His friends snickered. I could feel the eyes of our regulars on us. Mr. Chen came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, his face a stony mask. What can I get for you? I asked, keeping my voice as flat and professional as I could. Let's see, Ethan said, tapping a finger on the plastic-covered menu. He made a show of reading it, his lip curled in a sneer. What would a future tech billionaire eat in a— What is this place? A greasy spoon? He looked at Mr. Chen. You the owner? My condolences. Mr. Chen just stared at him, his eyes like chips of flint. Ethan ordered the most expensive thing on the menu, a simple steak and eggs, and then proceeded to make a scene. The steak was tough as shoe leather. The eggs were runny. He complained loudly, pushing his plate away dramatically. Seriously, Clara, he said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. This is it? This is what you threw your life away for? To serve slop to people in a place that smells like old socks? He stood up, throwing $100 bill on the counter. Keep the change. Looks like you need it more than I do. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. See, Clara? He called out across the quiet room. This is your ceiling. I'm building an empire, and you're serving noodles. Then he and his friends walked out, their laughter echoing behind them. The diner was silent. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my face burning with a white-hot shame. I had been exposed, mocked and humiliated in my own sanctuary, in front of the man who had become my only family. The next day, the online attack began. A flood of 1-star reviews appeared on the diner's webpage. Terrible food. Rude owner. Found a hair in my soup. They were all clearly fake, posted by accounts with no other review history. But the damage was done. Our rating plummeted. Saturday was quiet. A few of our regulars came in, but the usual lunch rush never materialized. Mr. Chen was silent, but I could see the hurt in his eyes as he looked out at the empty booths. The financial hit was real, and it pained him. For a moment, a wave of despair washed over me. I felt defeated. I had built this small new life for myself, and with a single cruel visit, they had managed to reach in and poison it. They could still hurt me. They could still find me, and try to ruin me. But as I stood there, watching Mr. Chen meticulously wipe down an already clean counter, the despair began to curdle into something else. It hardened into a cold, diamond-hard fury. This wasn't just an attack on me anymore. It was an attack on Mr. Chen, on his livelihood, on his quiet dignity. They had crossed a line. Ethan thought he was so clever, so powerful. He thought he had shown me my ceiling. He had no idea what I was really building. He had no idea that he had just handed me the final, most potent ingredient for my success: pure, unadulterated fuel. The game was no longer just about building my own success. It was about dismantling theirs. The rumor arrived on a whisper, carried by an old friend of Mr. Chen's who still worked in the high-end restaurant supply chain. "The Gilded Spoon," the friend had said over the phone. "Old man Hemlock is finally selling. Getting too old for the stress, wants to retire to Florida. He's looking for a quiet buyer, doesn't want a big fuss." Mr. Chen hung up the phone and looked at me, a strange light in his eyes. He didn't need to say anything. We both knew what this meant. This was the moment. This was the target. The Gilded Spoon was more than just a restaurant to my family. It was their temple. It was the backdrop for every major celebration, every power lunch, every carefully curated display of their status. Owning it wouldn't just be a business success, it would be a poetic, devastating act of justice. It was time to cash in every late night, every raw-handed shift, every dollar I had saved. It was time to take my meticulously crafted business plan, my secret blueprint for a bistro named The Spoon, and make it a reality. My first move was to approach a credit union known for its support of small businesses, particularly in the restaurant industry. I made an appointment with a loan officer named Ms. Albright. She was a no-nonsense woman in her late 40s, with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through you. I walked in with my binder, my heart pounding in my chest. I was a 23-year-old woman with a work history that consisted of a coffee shop and a greasy spoon diner. On paper, I was a terrible risk. Ms. Albright was skeptical. I could see it in the way she leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed. "So, Miss Vance," she said, her tone professional but cool, "you want a significant loan to purchase one of the most established and expensive restaurant properties in this city. Your experience is limited." "My experience is in the trenches," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I know how a kitchen works from the bottom up, but this isn't about my past experience, it's about this." I pushed the binder across the desk. "This is my business plan." For the next hour, I walked her through it. I didn't just show her the numbers, I explained the logic behind them. I showed her my market research, my cost analysis for every single dish, my 3-tiered marketing strategy, my contingency plans for slow months. I spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who had lived and breathed this plan for 2 years. As I spoke, I saw her posture change. She leaned forward, she started taking notes, she asked sharp, pointed questions, and for every one, I had a detailed, well-reasoned answer. She was no longer looking at a dishwasher, she was looking at a businesswoman. Still, it wasn't enough. "It's an impressive plan, Miss Vance," she said, closing the binder. "One of the best I've seen. But the numbers are tight, the bank needs more assurance." That was the moment for my final play. I handed her a sealed envelope. "This is a letter of recommendation from my mentor, Mr. Chen." Miss Albright raised an eyebrow. "I know Mr. Chen," she said. "He had a place downtown years ago. A shame what happened there. He co-signed the loan," I added. "Not with money. He doesn't have it. He co-signed with his reputation." The letter was simple but powerful. Mr. Chen had written about my work ethic, my integrity, my financial discipline. He described the moral compass test with the supplier and how I had chosen principle over profit. He staked his good name, the one thing he had left, on my success. That letter, combined with my bulletproof plan, was enough. The loan was approved. To ensure absolute secrecy, the next steps had to be surgical. I hired a lawyer and formed a holding company, a faceless entity I named CVB Enterprises. Clara Vance would appear on no public documents. The purchase was made through the holding company, a quiet, all-cash transaction that went completely unnoticed by the city's gossip columns. One rainy Tuesday in October, I stood across the street, holding a set of keys in my hand, and watched as the "Closed for Business" sign went up in the window of the Gilded Spoon. It was mine. The next 3 months were a frantic, exhilarating whirlwind. I officially closed the restaurant for renovations. I didn't just act as the new owner. I was the project manager, the designer, and often the manual laborer. I was there at dawn with the contractors, and there long after they left, sweeping up drywall dust and painting walls. I tore out the stuffy old-fashioned decor, the dark wood, the flocked wallpaper, the heavy velvet drapes. I replaced it with a vision from my business plan: warm, reclaimed wood, soft, modern lighting, an open kitchen that put the craft of cooking on display. It was transformed from a mausoleum of old money into a vibrant, elegant, and welcoming bistro. I retained some of the key staff, including the general manager, David. I met with him on the first day. He was a professional, reserved man, but I could see the curiosity in his eyes. He remembered me from my birthday dinner. "I'm the new owner," I told him simply. He didn't show much surprise, just a flicker of something in his expression, respect perhaps. I walked him through my vision, my new menu, my standards of service. I wasn't the arrogant child of a wealthy man. I was a hands-on owner who knew her business from the ground up. I earned his loyalty, not by demanding it, but by demonstrating my competence. I was building my empire, brick by brick in plain sight, yet completely hidden. My family, I knew, would occasionally drive past their old haunt, shaking their heads at the closed sign, lamenting the loss of their favorite spot, never once suspecting that the person responsible for its transformation was the daughter they had thrown away. The newly christened restaurant, The Spoon, opened on a crisp November evening. There was no grand opening party, no press release. I just unlocked the doors. The buzz started slowly, as a murmur among local food bloggers and adventurous diners. Then came the first glowing review in the city's weekly paper. "A stunning reinvention," the critic wrote. "The Spoon offers a masterclass in modern bistro cuisine, transforming a stuffy relic into the city's most exciting new dining destination." Business exploded. We were booked solid for weeks in advance. I was living my dream, but it was a dream forged in the fires of a 16-hour workday. I was the first one in, and the last one out, a whirlwind of motion from the kitchen to the front of house. One afternoon, amidst a pile of invoices and reservation requests, an envelope arrived in the mail. It was thick, creamy cardstock, with my name, Clara Vance, written in my mother's elegant looping calligraphy. My heart did a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. I tore it open. It was a formal invitation. "Robert and Margaret Vance request the pleasure of your company at a celebration of their 35th wedding anniversary." I scanned down the card, my eyes searching for the one detail that mattered. The venue. There it was, in crisp black ink. The Spoon. A cold, triumphant smile spread across my face. They had no idea. They had probably been annoyed that their old haunt, the Gilded Spoon, had closed. Then they must have heard about this trendy new bistro that had taken its place. For my mother, hosting her party at the most talked-about new restaurant in the city would be the ultimate status symbol. The irony was so thick, so delicious, I could almost taste it. The invitation felt less like an olive branch and more like a summons. It was a challenge, a way for them to flaunt their enduring success in the very space I now commanded, without even knowing it. They were walking into my world, on my terms, and they were completely oblivious. My first gut instinct was to throw the invitation in the trash. Why would I subject myself to their poison again? What did I have to prove? I didn't need their approval anymore. But then I hesitated. This wasn't just about avoiding them, this was about closing a chapter. That evening, I found Mr. Chen sitting at his now permanent corner table, which the staff always kept reserved for him. He was a quiet, constant presence in the restaurant, a guardian angel in a worn cardigan. He never interfered, but his steady gaze was a source of immense strength for me. I sat down across from him and slid the invitation across the table. He read it, his expression unchanging. He looked up at me, his dark eyes searching my face. "What will you do?" he asked. "I don't want to go," I confessed. "I don't want to see them. I don't want to hear their little digs and their fake compliments. I'm done with it." Mr. Chen took a slow sip of his tea. "They expect you to arrive as a guest," he said, his voice calm and steady. "They expect you to feel small in their presence, to be intimidated by the success they are putting on display." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking with mine. "But you are not a guest, Clara. You are the host. The building you stand in, the staff that serves them, the very air they will breathe that night, it all belongs to you." He let the words sink in. "They think they are walking into their party. They are walking into your world. Go, and remember who you are." His words were like a suit of armor clicking into place around me. The fear and hesitation vanished, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. He was right. I wasn't the broken girl they had kicked out onto the curb. I was the owner. I was in control. I picked up my phone and sent a simple text to the number on the RSVP card, my mother's number. Looking forward to it. I'll be there. The trap was set, and the architects of my downfall were about to walk right into it. The night of the party, I chose my armor carefully. Not a flashy dress, but a simple, elegant black sheath that was understated and professional. My hair was pulled back in a neat chignon. My only jewelry was a pair of simple pearl earrings. I wanted to look like I belonged, not like I was trying to. I walked into my own restaurant 30 minutes after the party had started, intentionally making a low-key entrance. The room was buzzing. My mother had, as expected, gone all out. There were flowers everywhere, a string quartet playing softly in the corner, and a crowd of my parents' friends, all dressed to the nines. My parents stood near the entrance, greeting their guests like royalty. When they saw me, their reactions were exactly as I had predicted. My mother's eyes did a quick, critical sweep, from my shoes to my hair. A faint, condescending sneer touched her lips. "Clara, you clean up nicely," she said, her voice carrying a tone of surprise, as if she'd expected me to show up in my diner apron. "It's amazing what a little effort can do." My father clapped me on the shoulder with a performative warmth that didn't reach his eyes. "Glad you could make it, kiddo," he said, his voice a little too loud. He gestured expansively around the room. "Take a good look around. This is what real success looks like, the best new spot in the city. Maybe it'll inspire you to aim a little higher than, well, you know." Then I saw my brother, Ethan, leaning against the bar. The years had not been kind to him. His brilliant app had crashed and burned within a year, a spectacular failure that my parents never spoke of. He looked thinner, and the smug confidence he used to wear like a second skin had been replaced by a bitter, resentful edge. He saw me and slunk over, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Don't get too comfortable, sis," he whispered, his breath sour with alcohol. "You're just a tourist here. You don't belong." I just smiled faintly. "It's a beautiful party, Ethan." My calmness seemed to throw them off. They expected me to be sullen, or intimidated, or perhaps overly eager to please. I was none of those things. I was a quiet observer in my own domain. I moved through the room, politely accepting a glass of champagne from a waiter who gave me a subtle, knowing wink. I saw David, my general manager, overseeing the staff with his usual unflappable professionalism. Our eyes met across the room, and he gave me the slightest of nods. He was my ace in the hole, the neutral arbiter who knew the whole story. He was the jury, and the trial was about to begin. I found my Aunt Carol standing by herself near a large floral arrangement, nervously shredding a cocktail napkin. She looked older, more worn down than I remembered. When she saw me approaching, she stiffened, her eyes darting towards my mother, as if checking for permission to speak to me. "Hello, Aunt Carol," I said softly. "Clara," she breathed, her voice tight. "You look well." "I am well," I said. "And you?" She just gave a weak, watery smile and looked away, unable to hold my gaze. The fear my parents instilled in her was a physical presence, a cage she couldn't escape. I watched my parents work the room. They were in their element, masters of this universe they had created. They laughed, they held court, they accepted compliments on their choice of venue. "It's just divine, Margaret," one of her friends gushed. "How did you ever manage to get a booking? I hear it's impossible." My mother beamed. "Oh, you know," she said with a wave of her hand, "Robert has connections." I had to suppress a laugh. They were so blissfully, arrogantly ignorant. They moved through my restaurant, on my payroll, drinking my wine, and claimed it all as a testament to their own power. The entire evening was a carefully constructed play, and they were the stars. But they didn't know that the playwright, the director, and the owner of the theater was the girl they thought they had destroyed. I took a sip of my champagne and waited. The climax was coming. The moment arrived as I knew it would, with the clinking of a fork against a champagne glass. My father, Robert, stood in the center of the room, his chest puffed out, a benevolent smile plastered on his face. The string quartet fell silent. A hush fell over the guests. This was his favorite part of any evening, the speech. "Margaret, my love," he began, raising his glass to my mother, who preened under the attention. 35 years. They say that's the choral anniversary. Strong, beautiful, and built over time, just like our life together. The guests offered a polite smattering of applause. He let it die down, then his eyes scanned the room, his expression shifting from sentimental to serious. He was moving on to the second part of his standard speech, the lecture. Looking around tonight, he said, his voice taking on a more solemn tone, I'm reminded of the importance of family, of legacy, and of the values we pass down to the next generation. His eyes flickered to me for a fraction of a second, just long enough to make his point. Values like ambition, hard work, not being afraid to aim high. The dig was as subtle as a sledgehammer. I kept my expression neutral, my gaze steady. It's a different world today, he continued, shaking his head with performative disappointment. A generation that sometimes seems to lack grit. They want trophies for just showing up. They settle for mediocrity. He was warming up to his grand finale, a demonstration of his own high standards, his own refusal to settle. He scanned the room as if looking for a target. And then, right on cue, he clicked his fingers in the air, a sharp, dismissive sound that cut through the silence. He directed it towards David, my general manager, who was standing quietly near the service bar. Manager, my father barked, his voice laced with the condescending authority of a man used to being obeyed. A word. David walked over, his face a perfect mask of professional calm. Yes, Mr. Vance? The wine service, my father said, gesturing to the half-empty glasses on the tables. It's been a little slow tonight. A little lax. For the prices you charge at a place like this, I expect better. I expect perfection. He was making a public point, using my staff, my manager, to showcase his own superior status. It was a classic power play. The room was dead silent. Everyone was watching. David listened patiently until my father was finished. He didn't look at my father. He turned his head slightly and looked directly at me, across the room. His voice was calm, clear, and carried to every corner of the dining room. I do apologize for any lapse in service you may have experienced, sir. He paused, letting the silence stretch. However, final decisions on staffing levels and all standards of service ultimately rest with the owner. I'll have to defer to her. Then David, my quiet, professional, neutral observer, turned his body and made a clear, open gesture towards me. Mrs. Vance, he asked, his voice ringing with clarity. What would you like me to do about it? Time stopped. A collective silent gasp seemed to suck the air out of the room. Every head swiveled in my direction. I saw my father's face. The blood drained from it, leaving a pasty gray pallor. His jaw dropped open, a comical fish-like gape. I saw my mother. She froze completely, her champagne glass held halfway to her lips, her face turning so pale she looked like a marble statue. Her eyes were wide with a horror that was just beginning to dawn. I saw Ethan. His smug, drunken smirk dissolved into a mask of pure, slack-jawed disbelief. He looked from me to David and back again, his mind unable to process the reality of the situation. I let the moment hang there for a few seconds, savoring the beautiful, terrible silence. Then I stood up slowly, deliberately. I met David's gaze across the room and gave him a small, appreciative nod. David, I said, my voice steady and clear, projecting to the entire room. The service is perfect, thank you. I then turned my attention to my parents. The sea of guests parted slightly, giving me a clear line of sight to the wreckage of their composure. Mom, Dad, I said, a calm, cool smile on my face. You know, Dad, you were right. You told me to take a good look around tonight, that this place might inspire me. And it did. I let that sink in. I was so inspired, in fact, that I bought this restaurant with the money I earned after you took my college fund and gave it to Ethan. I glanced at my brother, whose face was now a sickly shade of green. A fund, by the way, that you gambled away on a failed app. The final blow. I turned back to David. David, I said, my voice crisp and authoritative, please close out my family's house account, permanently. Everything for their party tonight is on them. Please present them with the bill. From the corner of my eye, I saw my Aunt Carol. Her hands flew to her mouth, and she let out a strangled sob, a sound that was a bizarre mixture of horror and, I thought, a strange dawning relief. At his corner table, which I had insisted he attend as my personal guest of honor, Mr. Chen beamed. It was not a triumphant smile, but a deep, quiet, profoundly proud one. My father, the great Robert Vance, made a small, choked sound and collapsed back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. My mother just stared at me, her mind clearly broken, her entire worldview, built on a foundation of money, status, and intimidation, crumbling into dust around her. In front of all their friends, their business associates, their entire social circle, they had been stripped bare. Their power was an illusion, and I had just turned on the lights. I looked at them one last time, the fallen tyrants in the ruins of their own party. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," I said. And with that, I turned and walked away, not as their failed daughter, but as the owner of the room, the architect of my own life, and the master of my own destiny. A month can feel like a lifetime. The fallout from my parents' anniversary party was swift and spectacular. The story spread like wildfire through their social circle, a delicious piece of gossip that stripped them of the one thing they valued more than money, their reputation. I heard secondhand that my father had to sell some stock to cover the massive bill for the party. My mother apparently didn't leave the house for weeks. Ethan just disappeared. I didn't revel in it. By the time it happened, the need for revenge had already burned out, replaced by the quiet, steady hum of my own success. The final scene of our family drama felt less like a victory and more like a closing. The final chapter takes place on a busy Saturday night at the Spoon. The restaurant is alive, not with the stiff, forced formality of its past life, but with the genuine, vibrant energy of people enjoying themselves. The air buzzes with happy conversation, the clinking of glasses, and from the open kitchen, the rhythmic clatter of pans and the sizzle of food hitting a hot grill. I'm not in a fancy dress tonight. I'm in my element. I'm wearing my chef's whites, a clean apron tied around my waist. My hair is pulled back, and there's a small smudge of sauce on my cheek that I don't know is there. I'm on the pass, the nerve center of the kitchen, expediting orders. "Fire 2 scallops, 1 risotto," I call out. "Yes, chef." The response comes back in a chorus from my line cooks. I grab a tasting spoon and dip it into the mushroom risotto, my face serious as I check the seasoning. It's perfect. I share a quick, conspiratorial grin with the young cook who made it. He beams with pride. This is my joy. It's not the quiet, pristine dining room, it's the heat, the pressure, the controlled chaos of the kitchen. It's the teamwork, the shared purpose, the creation of something beautiful out of simple ingredients. The work is hard, bone-achingly so. By the end of the night, my feet will throb and my back will ache, but it's a good ache. It's the ache of effort, of purpose. During a brief lull in the service, I walk out into the dining room. I see Mr. Chen sitting at his usual corner table, a newspaper folded neatly beside him, a cup of oolong tea steaming in his hands. He's not just a customer, he's the silent, proud guardian of this place, the foundation upon which it was all built. I walk over to his table. He looks up from his paper, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He doesn't offer grand congratulations or flowery praise. That's not his way. He just looks at the bowl of soup he's nearly finished and gives a small, decisive nod. "Good soup tonight, Clara," he says simply. Coming from him, it's the highest compliment in the world. It means everything is as it should be. "Thank you, Mr. Chen," I say, and the gratitude in my voice is for so much more than the compliment. I stand there for a moment, just looking around my restaurant. I see the staff, who work hard not because they fear me, but because they respect me. I see the customers, their faces happy and animated, sharing food and making memories. I see the beautiful space, the warm lighting, the elegant lines, a physical manifestation of a dream I built from nothing. And in that moment, I realized that the revenge was never really the point. The victory wasn't watching my family fall, it was the quiet, profound joy of watching myself rise. True power, I now understand, isn't about owning things or having control over people. It's not about freezing credit cards or having a fancy title. It's about building a life that is authentically, unapologetically your own. It's about finding work that you love and doing it with integrity. It's about earning the respect of people you admire. I haven't heard a single word from my parents or my brother since that night. I don't expect I ever will. Their chapter in my life is closed, the book shut and placed on a high shelf to gather dust. This chapter, my chapter, is just beginning, and it smells like fresh bread, simmering stock, and endless possibility. My story is proof that the people who underestimate you are just giving you the space to build your success in secret. Your worth is determined by you, not by the labels they try to give you. What labels have you refused to accept in your own life? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about overcoming the odds. Thanks for watching.